The first attack ship dropped through the clouds like a falling star, its hull gleaming with an oily iridescence that hurt to look at directly. Marcus watched it through his rifle scope, noting the way it moved too smooth, too controlled, clearly using technology far beyond anything humans possessed. "Here they come," he murmured to his companion. The dragon was crouched beside him, its healing wing folded carefully against its body. Golden eyes tracking the descending ship with predatory focus. The ship settled into a hover pattern, about 500 meters from their position, and Marcus could see scanning beams sweeping across the rocky terrain. They were being analyzed, cataloged, probably dismissed as no significant threat. That was their first mistake. Marcus waited until the ship moved closer, clearly intending to land near his camp. When it was directly over the first cluster of mining charges he'd buried, he triggered the detonator. The explosion was spectacular. 20 small charges detonating in sequence brought down a section of cliff face that must have weighed several thousand tons. The ship, caught in the rockfall, crashed to the ground with its hull cracked open like an egg. "One down," Marcus said with grim satisfaction. The dragon made a sound that was definitely approval, but the celebration was short-lived. 2 more ships descended from orbit, and these pilots were clearly more cautious. They stayed high out of range of any more falling rocks and began systematic bombardment of the area around Marcus's camp. Energy beams turned stone to vapor and superheated the air until it glowed. Marcus and the dragon pressed themselves flat against the rocks as the barrage intensified, each shot coming closer to their position. "They're trying to flush us out," Marcus called over the sound of destruction. "Make us run so they can pick us off in the open." The dragon responded by lifting its head and releasing a sound Marcus had never heard before, a deep, resonant call that seemed to shake the very mountains. It wasn't quite a roar, wasn't quite music, but something that combined both into something primal and powerful. For a moment the bombardment stopped. Then one of the attacking ships descended lower, apparently curious about the source of the sound. Another mistake. The dragon's head snapped toward Marcus's position and it made a sharp clicking noise. Marcus didn't understand the sound, but the urgency was clear. His companion was telling him to get ready for something when the ship came within range. The dragon did something that redefined Marcus's understanding of physics. It opened its mouth and released a stream of energy that turned the rocks in front of them into molten slag. But this wasn't fire, this was something far more sophisticated. A focused plasma discharge that cut through the ship's armor like it was tissue paper. The ship spiraled to the ground in flames, its systems sparking and failing. "You've been holding back," Marcus said, staring at his companion with new respect. "You're not just intelligent, you're a living weapons platform." The dragon made a sound that might have been embarrassment. Apparently, using such devastating force was not something it did lightly, but their problems weren't over. The third ship had pulled back to maximum range and was now calling for reinforcements. Marcus could see more contacts appearing on his scanner, at least 6 more ships incoming from orbit. "All right," Marcus said, checking his remaining equipment. "Time for Plan B." He activated his camp's main communications array and began broadcasting on every frequency he could access. Not to the dragon's people, those transmissions would be too dangerous now. Instead, he was calling home. "This is Survey Team 7 calling any human vessel in range," Marcus transmitted, knowing the signal would take hours to reach the nearest human outpost. "I am Marcus Chun, currently on Kepler 442b, coordinates attached. I have made first contact with an intelligent alien species currently facing genocide by hostile forces. Immediate military assistance required." He repeated the message several times, then switched to a different Protocol 1. That would be automatically relayed by every human communications, satellite, and deep space probe in the region. Within minutes, his distress call would be spreading throughout human space. The dragon watched this with obvious confusion, until Marcus explained what he was doing. "My people need to know what's happening here," he said. "And more importantly, they need to know that there are survivors worth protecting. Humans don't abandon our friends, even if we just met them." Understanding dawned in the dragon's golden eyes, followed by something that looked suspiciously like hope, but they still had to survive long enough for any help to arrive. The reinforcement ships were beginning their descent, and Marcus could see they were using different tactics, this time staying spread out, approaching from multiple directions, not giving him any single target for his remaining explosives. Smart, Marcus admitted. But they're still thinking like a traditional military force. They expect us to defend this position until we're overwhelmed. He began packing his essential equipment while the dragon watched curiously. The thing about humans, Marcus continued, shouldering his pack, is that we're not very traditional. We adapt, we improvise, and we absolutely refuse to play by anyone else's rules. Instead of preparing for a last stand, Marcus led the way out of their fortified position and toward the rough terrain beyond. The dragon followed, moving carefully but keeping pace despite its injured wing. "Where are we going?" The dragon's gestures seemed to ask. Marcus pointed toward a series of deep ravines that cut through the landscape like scars. "We're going to give them exactly what they don't expect. Mobile defense that turns their superior numbers into a disadvantage." The attacking ships had spread out to surround the camp, expecting to find their targets dug in and desperate. Instead, they found an abandoned position and evidence that their quarry had escaped into terrain that would make aerial bombardment nearly impossible without risking. Their own ships stopped Marcus, and the dragon used the ravines like highways, moving through the landscape in ways the ships couldn't follow directly. When the aliens sent ground troops to pursue them, Marcus was ready with the guerrilla tactics that humans had been perfecting since before they reached the stars. The first pursuit team ran straight into a carefully prepared ambush mining charges that brought down a narrow section of ravine wall, trapping the aliens in a box canyon. The second team found their route blocked by a rock slide that Marcus triggered at just the right moment. "You see," Marcus explained to his companion as they moved to their next position, "those ships are designed for space combat and orbital bombardment. They're not built for this kind of close-quarters, terrain-based fighting. But humans have been doing this kind of warfare since we were living in caves." The dragon was learning to appreciate human tactical thinking. When they reached the next ambush point, it helped Marcus position the explosives for maximum effect, its understanding of physics making the traps even more devastating than Marcus could have managed alone. For 3 hours, they led the alien forces through the ravines in a deadly game of cat and mouse. But Marcus wasn't just buying time, he was learning. Each engagement taught him more about alien tactics, their technology, their weaknesses. "They're incredibly advanced," he observed during a brief rest, "but they fight like a machine. No creativity, no adaptation. They have a plan and they stick to it even when it's clearly not working." The dragon made a sound of agreement, then touched Marcus's scanner with one claw. New contacts were appearing at the edge of the system human ships, responding to his distress call faster than should have been possible. "Military patrol," Marcus realized, reading the identification codes. "They must have been closer than I thought." And then he grinned. "And they're bringing friends?" What had started as a small patrol was growing rapidly as more human vessels dropped out of hyperspace. Marcus's distress call hadn't just reached the nearest military unit, it had triggered a full emergency response, but the alien attack fleet was regrouping too, pulling back from their ground pursuit to deal with the arriving human ships. Marcus watched the tactical display with growing excitement as he realized what was about to happen. "First contact," he said to the dragon, "between humans and your enemies. This is going to be interesting." The space battle, when it came, was brief and decisive. The alien ships were individually more advanced than their human counterparts, but they had never fought an enemy that used such chaotic, unpredictable tactics. Human pilots didn't follow neat formation flying or logical attack patterns. They swarmed, improvised, and took risks that no sane military computer would ever recommend. More importantly, they had something the aliens clearly hadn't expected: detailed intelligence about enemy capabilities. Transmitted by Marcus from the ground, when the last alien ship was either destroyed or fleeing toward deep space, Marcus finally allowed himself to relax. The dragon beside him was making sounds of wonder and gratitude as more human ships continued to arrive, not just military vessels now, but science ships, diplomatic corps, even some civilian vessels whose crews had volunteered for what they were calling the greatest rescue mission in human history. The communication link crackled to life with incoming transmissions. Ground team. This is Admiral Morrison aboard the UES Endeavour. We received your first contact protocols and intelligence reports. Outstanding work down there. We have medical tea. Marcus's base camp was nothing special, a prefab shelter, some basic equipment, and a perimeter of motion sensors that had seemed adequate for studying wildlife. Now, as he helped the wounded dragon settle beside the shelter's thermal regulators, everything felt woefully inadequate for protecting against unknown hostiles. The dragon examined the human technology with obvious curiosity, sniffing delicately at the air recycling unit and studying the solar collection arrays. When it saw Marcus's portable computer terminal, its golden eyes widened with unmistakable recognition. "You know what this is, don't you?" Marcus said, powering up the terminal. "Your people have technology too." The dragon moved closer, careful not to disturb its healing wing, and made a series of complex sounds. When Marcus looked puzzled, the creature tried a different approach. It extended one claw, very carefully, and touched the screen. The terminal immediately began displaying patterns Marcus had never seen before. Not random static, but organized data streams that his equipment was somehow interpreting and translating. The dragon wasn't just recognizing the technology, it was interfacing with it directly. "How are you doing that?" Marcus breathed, watching data flow across. His screen in patterns that looked almost like music made visible. The dragon withdrew its claw and looked at Marcus expectantly. On the screen, a simple image appeared, a star map showing the local system, with Kepler 442b highlighted. Then, other symbols appeared around nearby worlds, symbols that Marcus was beginning to recognize as the dragon's written language. "You're from here," Marcus said, understanding. "This is your space, your territory." He pointed to the symbols. "These are your colonies, aren't they?" "Your people's worlds." The dragon made an affirming sound, then touched the screen again. The star map zoomed in on Kepler 442b, showing what looked like settlements in the mountain ranges Marcus hadn't yet explored. But many of the settlement markers were flashing red, and as Marcus watched, they began disappearing one by one. "Someone's attacking your people," Marcus said grimly. "That's what happened to you. You were trying to defend your home." The dragon's next touch brought up a new image that made Marcus's blood run cold. Ships, sleek, predatory vessels that looked nothing like human designs but everything like weapons. And they were heading toward the planet in formation, too many to count. "An invasion fleet," Marcus whispered. Then he looked at his companion with new understanding. "You weren't just hurt in a random attack. You were scouting them, weren't you? Trying to get intelligence on their numbers and capabilities." The dragon's body language confirmed his guess. This wasn't just a wounded animal he'd helped, this was a military scout who'd been shot down while gathering crucial information about an enemy invasion. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, trying to process the situation. He was just one human with basic survey equipment, stuck on a world that was about to become a battlefield between two alien species. The sensible thing would be to call for evacuation and let the politicians sort it out, but as he looked at the data scrolling across his screen, Marcus realized something that changed everything. The attacking ships weren't just targeting military installations. They were systematically destroying civilian settlements, and the pattern of destruction suggested they weren't interested in conquest. This was genocide. "They're not trying to take your world," Marcus said quietly. "They want to wipe out your entire species." The dragon made a sound of profound sadness and touched the screen one more time. New images appeared, recordings from the attacks, transmitted by survivors before their settlements fell silent. Marcus watched in horror as the alien ships unleashed weapons that turned entire cities to glass, leaving nothing behind but melted stone and ash. "My God," Marcus breathed. "How many of you are left?" The dragon showed him scattered groups hiding in deep caves and underground shelters, cut off from each other and slowly being hunted down. Maybe a few thousand survivors out of what had clearly once been a thriving civilization. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. This was beyond first contact, beyond diplomacy, beyond anything he'd been trained for. This was watching an entire species face extinction while he stood by helpless, except he wasn't helpless, was he? Marcus pulled up his own files on the terminal, scrolling through the survey data he'd been collecting. These attackers, he said, thinking out loud. They're obviously advanced, but they've made one critical mistake. They don't know about humans. The dragon watched him intently as Marcus began cross-referencing his geological surveys with the attack patterns on the screen. Human surveying technology was primitive compared to what these aliens were using, but it was also completely different. His ground-penetrating scanners worked on principles that the attackers clearly hadn't accounted for. "Look at this," Marcus said, highlighting sections of his survey data. "They think they've found all your hiding places because they're scanning for energy signatures and thermal outputs. But they're not looking for simple geological irregularities that might indicate artificial excavation." He pulled up a three-dimensional map of the planet's underground structure, combining his survey data with the dragon's settlement information. There are natural cave systems here, and here that don't connect to any of the settlements they've already found. If your people could reach them. The dragon's eyes brightened with understanding. It touched the screen and began highlighting additional locations, places its own people knew about, but that wouldn't show up on standard scans. Together, they began mapping a network of hidden refuges that could potentially shelter the remaining survivors. "This could work," Marcus said, excitement growing. "But we need a way to communicate with your people. Let them know these locations are safe and how to reach them." The dragon considered this, then made a series of sounds that seemed almost like a question. When Marcus looked puzzled, the creature gestured toward his communications array. "You want to use my equipment to contact them?" Marcus asked. "I don't know if it's compatible with your technology." But the dragon was already moving toward the array, its movements purposeful and confident. When it placed a claw against the transmission dish, the equipment began humming with energy patterns Marcus had never seen before. "You're amplifying my signal," Marcus realized, "using your own bioelectrical field to boost the transmission and translate it into something your people can understand." The dragon made an affirming sound, then began transmitting. Marcus watched his equipment register massive power outputs as his companion sent complex data packets into space, not just coordinates and instructions, but emotional content, reassurance, hope. Over the next several minutes, responses began coming back. Weak signals from scattered groups of survivors, confirming they'd received the message and were beginning to move toward the safe zones. But the responses also brought disturbing news. "The attack fleet is accelerating their search pattern," Marcus said, reading the translated data. "They've detected the transmissions. They know someone's helping coordinate the survivors." The dragon's expression grew grim. It sent one final transmission, apparently final instructions and coordinates, then stepped back from the array. The meaning was clear. They couldn't risk any more communications without exposing the survivors. New locations. Marcus was studying the tracking data when his perimeter alarms began screaming. His sensors had detected multiple fast-moving objects approaching from orbit, ships that matched the configuration of the alien attack fleet. "They found us," Marcus said, grabbing his rifle and checking the power cell. "How long do you need for your wing to heal enough for flight?" The dragon tested its wing carefully, then made a sound that clearly meant not long enough. They were grounded and badly outnumbered. Marcus looked at his equipment, his shelter, and his wounded companion, and felt a familiar calm settle over him. He'd been in hopeless situations before, not on this scale, but the principles were the same. When you couldn't run and couldn't hide, you had to make the enemy come to you on your terms. "All right," he said, moving with quick efficiency. "We can't fight them in space and we can't outrun them. But this is my territory now. And I know things about human defensive tactics that they definitely don't." He began pulling devices from his equipment, cache mining charges meant for collecting rock samples, environmental sensors that could be repurposed as proximity detectors, and the compact fusion battery that powered his entire camp. The thing about humans, Marcus explained to his companion as he worked, is that we've been fighting wars on hostile terrain for thousands of years. We know how to turn any environment into a weapon. The dragon watched with growing interest as Marcus rigged the mining charges with remote detonators and began placing them at strategic points around the camp. Each charge was small individually, but he was clustering them in ways that would bring down specific rock formations and create choke points. They'll expect us to run or hide, Marcus continued, setting up crossfire positions using his camp's defensive systems. What they won't expect is for two people to turn a small survey camp into a fortress and dare them to come and take it. The dragon made a sound that might have been laughter, then began helping in its own way. Using its claws, it carved channels in the rock that would direct the blast patterns from Marcus's charges more. Marcus Chen crouched behind the twisted metal remains of what had once been a survey station on Kepler 442b, the acrid smell of burnt circuitry mixed with something else, something organic and sharp that made his nose wrinkle. 3 months on this supposedly empty world, and he was still discovering new ways it could try to kill him. The job was simple enough. Corporate wanted a full biological survey before they started mining operations. What they hadn't mentioned was that the previous survey team had vanished without a trace, leaving only scattered equipment and some very disturbing final transmissions about flying serpents and impossible predators. Marcus adjusted his rifle scope and scanned the rocky outcropping ahead. The thermal readings were off the charts in that direction, but the signatures didn't match any known life forms in the database. Then again, the database for this world was mostly empty anyway. A sharp cry echoed across the barren landscape, high-pitched, desperate, and definitely not human. Marcus had been tracking various creatures for weeks now, cataloging everything from armored beetle things, the size of cars, to crystalline birds that could slice through steel with their wings. But this sound was different. There was intelligence behind it, and pain. He moved carefully through the maze of fallen rocks and twisted alien vegetation. The planet's binary suns cast strange shadows that seemed to move on their own, but Marcus had learned to trust his instruments more than his eyes. The thermal signature was getting stronger, and now he could hear something else, a low rumbling that sounded almost like purring, but with an undertone that made his teeth ache. When he finally saw it, Marcus nearly dropped his rifle. The creature was perhaps 3 meters long, with scales that shifted between deep emerald and midnight black depending on how the light hit them. Its body was serpentine but supported by 4 powerful legs ending in claws that could probably punch through starship armor. Massive wings, currently folded against its back, showed tears and burn marks from some recent trauma. But what stopped Marcus cold were the eyes, brilliant gold with vertical pupils, watching him with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware, a dragon. An actual, impossible dragon on an alien world. The creature's left wing was badly damaged, with what looked like energy weapon burns along the membrane. A thick, viscous fluid that might have been blood pooled beneath it. The dragon's breathing was labored, and Marcus could see smaller burns along its flank. Whatever had attacked this thing had been serious about killing it. Marcus lowered his rifle slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He'd spent years studying animal behavior before joining the Survey Corps, and every instinct told him this was no mere beast. The way it tracked his movement, the controlled aggression in its posture despite obvious pain, this was a thinking creature. "Easy there," he said quietly, knowing it probably couldn't understand his words but hoping his tone might convey something peaceful. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dragon's head tilted slightly and Marcus caught his breath. It was definitely listening, definitely processing his voice. Then it made a sound, not the cry of pain from before, but something softer, more questioning. Almost conversational. Marcus had always been good with animals. Back on Earth, he'd worked with everything from injured raptors to rescued big cats. His colleagues joked that he could charm a tiger into purring, but Marcus knew it was really about patience and respect. Every creature, no matter how dangerous, just wanted to survive and protect itself. This was bigger than any animal he'd ever worked with, and clearly more intelligent. But the principles were the same. He set his rifle down completely and pulled his field medkit from his pack. The dragon's golden eyes tracked every movement, but it didn't retreat or show signs of immediate aggression. That was promising. You're hurt pretty bad, aren't you? Marcus said, keeping his voice low and steady. Those look like plasma burns. Military grade, probably. Someone really wanted you dead. As he spoke, he noticed more details that made his pulse quicken. The dragon's scales weren't just beautiful, they seemed to absorb and redirect light in ways that would make it nearly invisible to standard sensors. The claws weren't just sharp, they had a metallic quality that suggested they could conduct or channel energy. And those eyes, they held a depth of intelligence that suggested not just awareness, but wisdom. This wasn't some primitive creature. This was something that belonged in the stars. Not cowering wounded on a mining world, Marcus started moving slowly closer, his hands visible and empty except for the medkit. I know you don't know me from the bastards who hurt you, but I'd like to help if you'll let me. I've patched up a lot of wounded animals in my time, though I'll admit you're my first dragon. The dragon made that soft questioning sound again, and Marcus realized it was actually trying to communicate. There were patterns in the tones, variations that suggested linguistic structure. This creature wasn't just intelligent, it had language. When Marcus was about 2 meters away, the dragon shifted its position. For a moment, he thought it might attack, but instead, it turned slightly to show him the worst of the wing damage. The message was clear. Yes, I need help, and I'm choosing to trust you. Okay, Marcus breathed, hardly believing what was happening. Let's see what we can do. The burns were worse up close than they'd looked from a distance. The wing membrane was tougher than anything Marcus had seen before. But the energy weapons had punched through in several places and left thermal damage that had prevented proper healing. Without treatment, the wing would never work properly again. Marcus opened his medkit and began pulling out supplies. The dragon watched every movement with those remarkable eyes, and Marcus found himself explaining what he was doing as he worked. This is a universal healing gel, he said, showing the tube. It's designed to work on any carbon-based life form. It should help with the burns and maybe encourage the membrane to regenerate. He gestured to the dragon's wing. May I? The dragon considered for a long moment, then slowly extended the damaged wing. Marcus had to fight down a surge of awe. The membrane was beautiful, even damaged, a dark translucent. Material shot through with veins that seemed to glow with their own inner light. When Marcus carefully applied the gel, the dragon shivered but didn't pull away. I know it stings at first, Marcus said, continuing his gentle commentary. But it should start feeling better soon. This stuff works fast. As he worked, Marcus found himself increasingly amazed by his patient. The dragon not only tolerated his ministrations but seemed to actively cooperate, shifting position to give him better access to injuries and even using one claw to hold back scales that were getting in the way. It was like working with the most intelligent animal he'd ever encountered, except this clearly wasn't just an animal dot. When Marcus finished with the wing, he moved to the burns on the dragon's flank. These were smaller but looked painful, and the healing gel seemed to provide immediate relief. The dragon's breathing became easier, and some of the tension went out of its posture. There, Marcus said, settling back on his heels. That should help with the worst of it. The wing will need time to heal properly, but you should get full function back eventually. The dragon looked at him for a long moment, then did something that made Marcus's heart skip. It lowered its great head and gently touched its snout to Marcus's shoulder, the most careful, deliberate gesture of thanks Marcus had ever received. Then it began to speak. The sounds weren't quite words, not in any human sense, but they had structure, rhythm, meaning. Marcus found himself listening intently, trying to parse the alien language even as part of his mind reeled at the impossibility of it all. When the dragon finished its speech, it looked at Marcus expectantly. Clearly it was waiting for a response. I don't understand your language, Marcus admitted, but I think you're trying to thank me. If that's the case, you're welcome. Any decent person would have done the same. The dragon tilted its head, processing this. Then it tried again, this time with different sounds, different patterns. Marcus realized it was attempting to find a common language, testing different approaches to communication. You really are intelligent, aren't you? Marcus said wonderingly. Not just smart like a dolphin or a crow. You're people. You're an actual person. Something in his tone must have conveyed understanding because the dragon's eyes brightened. It tried yet another approach to communication, this time using gestures along with the sounds. When Marcus still couldn't understand, the dragon seemed to consider the problem. Then began tracing patterns in the dirt with one claw. The symbols were complex, mathematical, clearly representing advanced concepts. Marcus stared at them, his mind racing. This wasn't just a language barrier, this was first contact with an intelligent alien species. And he was pretty sure humans weren't supposed to be the ones making first contact on this supposedly empty world. Who attacked you? Marcus asked, pointing to the dragon's injuries and then gesturing outward. Who did this to you? The dragon understood the question immediately. Its expression darkened and it drew a new symbol in the dirt, angular, harsh, nothing like the flowing patterns of its own writing. Then it made a sound that was definitely hostile, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Whatever had attacked the dragon was still out there. And if they were will,